is neoliberalism? Neoliberalism is an economic philosophy that conceptually describes a move toward free markets, capitalism, and a diversion from government ownership. The typical policies associated with neoliberalism include free trade, globalization, privatization, and changes in government spending to stimulate the private sector. Neoliberals favor a progressive tax regime and do not oppose measures such as bailing out companies in financial distress. Being a rather dynamic topic, the meaning is interpreted by different schools of thought in several ways and is subject to debate.
Good day, everyone. I am Mariel Buron, and today I am going to discuss the history of neoliberalism. To start with, neoliberalism has gained traction over the last 25 years, and the term neoliberalism means a new kind of liberalism. The idea of a liberal economy became prominent in 1776 when a Scottish economist named Adam Smith wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. In his book, Smith propagated the idea of getting rid of government intervention and claimed that the best way for an economy to flourish is through free trade under regulation. And several years later, in the 1930s, another economist named John Keynes challenged the policy of liberalism and inferred that such a policy was suitable for capitalists. Government intervention was deemed crucial for the welfare of the public, and it led to several leaders transitioning and working towards the common good. However, the concept of neoliberalism is now being practiced on a global level following the decline in corporate profitability.
Hello everyone, I am going to discuss the difference between the liberalism and neoliberalism. Let me define first what is liberal. The term liberal has been derived from a Latin word which gives the meaning free. So it means that a person or organization that has a liberal viewpoint doesn't feel obligated to have the same traditional way of thinking or doing something. Difference of liberalism and neoliberalism in terms of In terms of ideology, liberalism is a political philosophy, while neoliberalism is an economic philosophy. In terms of focus, liberalism mainly focuses on individual freedom of thought, religion, life, property ownership, and etc., while neoliberalism focuses on the free trade and privatization and etc. In terms of time period, liberalism came into being in the Age of Enlightenment. On the other hand, neoliberalism came into being in the 20th century. In terms of current usage, liberalism is popular even today in many nations, while the usage of neoliberalism is declined and the term is now rarely used.
Hi! The previous reporter discussed to you the introduction of neoliberalism, and now let us proceed to the neoliberalism's characteristics. We have privatization, deregulation, free trade, reducing public expenditure, and elimination of the public good. So first, privatization. It includes selling all state-owned entities and businesses to the private sector. Like for example, banks, kanang land bank, ibaligya sa gobyerno sa private ownership ng mga bangko like Kantilan Bank or BDO. Ginabuhat ni siya sa gobyerno in order to normally achieve efficiency because they believe that the private ownership is thought to be more effective when running businesses. Some instances sab ka ng LRT sa transportation services. Di ba public ownership man na kay government corporation man na siya? Kung ibaligya sab nas gobyerno sa private nga businesses, mas mugain gid siya profit. However, mas mahal na ang pamiliti. Unlike before, sa gobyerno pa ang tag-iya nga ang aim is to serve publicly sa murang halaga. That's why privatization was being argued that it would typically result in the concentration of wealth in a few hands and make such services more expensive to acquire as the motive is of profitability and not the public good. Next, we have the deregulation, which entails reducing government regulation on economic services such as trade and imposing taxes, which is good para sa business sector. However, it has its negative impact because gamay ra kag tax nga ma-receive ang government, which is supposedly it was for the public services. Daghay mga tao nga nag-asa sa PhilHealth, most especially kung naay emergency right. So even though the regulation allows the companies to become more profitable and were given a chance to improve the quality overall of running businesses, it has still its negative impact to the society, most especially to those unfortunate one. In free trade characteristic, it reduced and eliminate the barriers imposed by the government to international trade. The World Trade Organization is the one who is at the center of this negotiate trade agreement across countries, which is used to protect unilateral action on imports, to protect discrimination between trading partners, and by not allowing exporting countries of using unfair practices. If it might happen, the World Trade Organization allows barriers. However, what's fair in international trade isn't always fair to the worker, most especially in developing countries, because it taken advantage of cheaper labor cost to locate factories in these countries and export the goods back to richer nations. That's why developing countries impose harsh working conditions and poor pay in order to gain cost and take advantage. Yet, the World Trade Organization currently does not take into account workers' condition when it comes to reducing expenditure. Government targeted towards the health and education sectors. For instance, they will reduce the financial support for those with free tuition university. With this, those students who cannot afford the tuition makastop jud sa pagskwela. And towards health, the most affected people are those unfortunate ones because they only rely their health security to the government support. And these characteristics, it is up to the private sector how they manage these services and how accessible they are to the overall community. And the last but not the least is the elimination of the public good. This is the time where people are only motivated to work towards their individual well-being rather than thinking for the good of the society. People in these characteristics became selfish and self-centered. Overall, neoliberalism eliminates welfare and social programs which adversely impacts the poorest segment of the population.
These are some of the criticism of neoliberalism. First is the market fundamentalism. One common criticism of neoliberalism is that advocating for a free market approach in areas such as health and education is misguided. Public services are not subject to the same profit motivation as other industries. More importantly, adopting a free market approach in the areas of health and education can lead to increase in inequality and the underfunding of resources and are necessary for long-term health and viability of an economy. Next is monopoly and monopsony power. Monopoly power is a single seller controls or dominates the supply of goods and services, characterized by an absence of competition, which often results in higher prices and inferior products. On the other hand, monopsony is a single buyer controls or dominates the demands for goods and services. The next criticism is one size fits all. An important problem for neoliberalism is that policies which may work in one country doesn't necessarily work in all countries. Every country has its own needs. It may be different for developed countries, but it is also different for the underdeveloped countries. Lastly, inequality. Neoliberal policies tend to increase inequality. Those who have low income have limited income power, and those who have become richer have a higher marginal propensity to save.
Key points of neoliberalism. It is an economic philosophy that conceptually describes a move towards free market, capitalism, and a diversion from a government ownership. The typical policies associated with neoliberalism include free trade, globalization, privatization, and changes in government spending to stimulate the private sector.